Hello, white people. I have a treat for you. I have a 12-minute excerpt from a live stream that Viva Fry did last night, and his guest was J.D. Vance. Now, you may have never heard of J.D. Vance, but J.D. Vance is the guy who wrote Hillbilly Elegy, and if you're new to this channel and you're not familiar with that book, it basically talks about how people from Appalachia, America, moved into American cities and all the problems that they face. And JD Vance has such an intelligent take on our current day problems. I was for white working class or white trash America. It's just phenomenal. All right, so here is an interview. I hope you guys enjoyed as much as I did. And remember, it's only going to be a 10 to 12 minute clip. I will put links to the interview from YouTube and from Rumble. Enjoy.
There are real material benefits when you come from an upwardly mobile working class background to turning your back on the people who made you who you are, who gave you all these chances. And it's just a very, very real thing. And it's, there are a lot of things about, the book coming out, and I was like this totally naive kid, and I had all these like media interviews that I was doing, and it's like, I look back on that now, I was like, God, I was so stupid. I wish I had said that better, I wish I had said this better. But the one thing that I am most proud about is that I never took the bait and said, well, you know why people are voting for Trump is because they're racist. And you remember how much pressure there was to do that. And I realized how much just material benefit, frankly, would come if I was just willing to say what's driving the Trump phenomenon is racism. There was such a desire to have that. And that's eventually why I stopped going on the mainstream press, is that was like all it was about. Is like, let's talk about what's wrong with these people who are voting for Trump. And it's just, I'm not playing that game. I do think of this in, I'm not a Marxist, but I do think of this in sort of class war type terms, because this is sort of maybe a slightly academic point, but I think it's worth making. If you look at all these studies that show an identification between Trump voters and racism, what they're almost always measuring is the statements that people agree with when it comes to racial issues of the day. Like, for example, if in response to the question, or they'll ask a question, the question is something like that, or the statement is something like this, and they'll ask whether you agree with it or not. It's, previous generations of Americans, like the Italians and the Irish, are able to get ahead in America. We should expect the same of new groups who come to America as well, right? Like, one, you ask Black Americans that question, and they overwhelmingly tend to agree with it. And two, you ask white Americans that question, they overwhelmingly tend to agree with it. But when they do, they're coded as having high racial resentment. And then they'll compare people who believe in those statements with their voting behavior, and then they'll draw the inference, well, clearly the most racist people are voting for Trump, therefore Trump's voters are racist. And if you think about what's going on in the context of this debate, right? Like, think about my community. I think about the 90,000 or so opioid overdose people in the country every year, which is disproportionately affecting working class whites. I think about the industrial and manufacturing decline that was foisted upon the country by very stupid trade policies over 2 or 3 decades. What that is about is telling my people to shut up and not object to ruling class mismanagement. They're just bad people, right? Because if you can tag them as bad people, either stupid or bigoted, you don't actually have to listen to their concerns. And that's what really this is all about, is whether it's the micro pressures that people like you and me face to sort of turn our backs on where we came from, macro pressure to treat people as quote-unquote deplorable so you don't actually have to listen to their concerns. I really think that what's going on is our ruling classes mismanage the country, and they don't want to have to face up to it and deal with the people who are very understandably frustrated with them.
Well, the idea, from a totally outside perspective, the idea of calling Trump supporters racist when he had the largest increases with the Latino community, the Black community, it doesn't make any sense as a statement of fact. It's just factually incorrect. Now, whether or not the most racist people in America supported Trump. I'm not convinced about that either. And knowing a little bit about history, I'm not convinced about that as a statement either. Yep. The idea is when you frame the debate, and I'm seeing this from Canada, and as an outsider with no dog in the race and no skin in the game, yep. when you frame it from a social discourse as one of starting from white privilege, and then when you have anyone like you coming out and not complaining and not racializing the debate, but rather just giving your own experience of a phenomenon that is affecting a certain demographic, which happens to be white America, you have people saying, how dare you complain? You've got the white privilege, and for you to complain is itself a sign of racism, so shut up and sit down, sort of thing. And I think there was one politician who said that almost verbatim. But the idea, yeah, I've seen it. It's par for the course. You want to delegitimize somebody, call them racist, because the power lies in the accusation, and then you can disregard them. And our prime minister in Canada does the same thing, and it's equally enraging.
Yep. But well, if I could venture a guess, I think the single most quoted section of my entire book is towards the end. It's really a throwaway line, sort of thinking about the recent politics of the geography that I'm living in, where I say that most commentators, I'm butchering the exact quote, but most commentators blame racism for Appalachian perceptions of Barack Obama, when really it's his elitism, right? That's really what they hate. It's not the color of the guy's skin, it's the sort of cultural segregation and condescension. And that line has been criticized so many times, even from people who are positive about the book generally. They can't stand the idea that it's not race that's motivating things. And I increasingly think of this as just like this ridiculous pathology among our ruling class. And again, it's like if you're focused on race, you're not focused on your own failures as a ruling class, and they just can't stop thinking about it. They can't stop talking about it. And I'm just one of these people, like, I'm so sick of it. I'm just so sick of being told that everything is about race. I am fortunate to have grown up in an era in the country's history where it really just did not enter my mind that much unless it was foisted upon me. And I feel like now it's being foisted upon me all the time. It's just total BS. And this is, by the way, I mean, my advice to anybody who's thinking about politics in any capacity is, like, you talk to people and, the cameras aren't rolling and they feel like they can be honest and open with you. The thing that I hear most consistently from working class voters in the state of Ohio is, we're so sick of being called racist. I think they know that it's being used as a weapon against their concerns, and they recognize that it's BS, and they know that the people who are doing it don't have their best interests at heart. And it's a hidden, powerful frustration that exists in the population, the constant accusation of racism. It's just people are getting sick of it.
And to avoid sort of the real discussion of the real issues at a core level, yes, in terms of ruling class failure. Because what's interesting is, in looking at some of the thematic aspects of your book, similar to Charles Murray's Coming Apart, other books like that, what's interesting to me is when I was younger, I saw an interview with Oprah and Alice Walker, where she asked Alice Walker about the lack of black male heroes in her books. And she responded, well, there aren't any in real life, which I was like, whoa, that's a little harsh. But then I was like, okay, there's something culturally taking place that she's describing. The next time I experienced that was actually in Russia and Eastern Europe. I asked a Russian, what defines a Russian girl, what defines a good man in Russia? She said, doesn't drink, doesn't hit, has a job. That was literally it. I was like, man, I should move to Russia. This is going to be cool. But, I mean, that was the dynamic of it. Was that level. I was like, whoa. And then I started studying it, and I noticed that in cultures that had serfdom, in cultures that had slavery, in other parts of Latin America and Africa, as well, disproportionately compared to, say, the Cayman Islands, where slavery didn't long exist, similar original African roots, but you don't see anywhere near the same patterns of behavior. They're old fishing communities going back centuries. And I was like, what you were describing in the book, what Murray describes in Coming Apart, the common identity that I noticed, and it relates to how you define an American dream, to have a home and to have a wife and good kids. Yep. You're describing the male identity of being a provider, yes, and being a protector. And what slavery destroyed was the ability for men to play that role within the slave community, and the same way that serfdom did. And the same way often also with friends. I clerked for a Native American tribe when I was younger as a younger lawyer, and I have a great Native American law professor that was fantastic. But he was describing the same thing in reservation communities, particularly, in that it wasn't something that was long within his particular tribe. It was something that, and it was the same pattern. It was when men can no longer provide, can no longer protect, that it creates cultural phenomenon, attachment tendencies with parents and children that recreates long after whatever it was that first started it. And I thought that was, and that's where going back to, as one aspect is jobs, another aspect is culture. One aspect is when you strip people of jobs, because demanufacturing happened to working class blacks in the urban north before it happened to working class whites. And we saw similar patterns of what it did to their communities. Black unemployment used to be less than white unemployment in 1960. But in the same dynamic we're seeing now across the entire sort of socio-cultural landscape. And then one of the problems is demanufacturing and how that's played a big role. Also illegal immigration and the way that creates labor substitution issues. But the other is now it's been topped over the last decade or so for men. Like the biggest thing with Trump was men. It didn't matter whether they were white, whether Latino, whether African American. There was a lot of men who disproportionately supported Trump. You had the smallest racial disparity in 2020 between a Republican and Democrat since the Civil Rights Act of 1964. It was that degree of shrinkage. Even Nick have that degree of small gap, and particularly amongst men. And to what degree, and now they get on top of that woke culture that says masculinity is bad, to be a man is bad, toxic masculinity is bad. But if you're a white guy and you're a straight white guy, then you're the bottom of the bottom of the gutter somehow. And to what degree does that explain in part what you've identified and why it is you care about the issues that you do in terms of jobs and culture?
Yep. Very, very good question. And this is one of the weirdest, intellectual pathologies of the ruling class is that they're very uncomfortable acknowledging that men and women are different and they need different things. And, I can remember being a 7-year-old kid and driving by a used car dealership and my grandfather beaming with pride and pointing out a car and saying, that car is made with Armco steel. It's incredibly powerful. And no, I'm not saying that feeling never exists in women, but I think that it is an important, critical part of successful, healthy male psychology to make things to be able to provide for your family. And we have, we have, you mentioned historical examples, but through deindustrialization, I think that we've taken that away from a lot of men. That really matters aside from the economic piece and aside from the psychological impact of those individual men, because it means you have an entire generation of young girls and young boys who are growing up without healthy fathers in the home. And that's a really powerful problem as well, for different reasons, right? I think boys and girls both need dads around. I think they need them maybe for different reasons. We know, for example, that women who have healthy relationships with their fathers have much more successful marriages later in life. We know that boys who have healthy relationships with their dads do much better in the labor market later in life. Sort of all these complicated things going on. But one of the big, big problems that we just cannot talk about, this is an elite thing, right? You talk to elites about the problems in the workplace, about the problems in any place, and it's like they think the biggest issue in society is that in a McKinsey boardroom, sometimes a man talks over a woman, right? That is their biggest concern is, I forget exactly, toxic masculinity, right, in the workplace. You have people who spread their legs too wide in a subway station or too vocal in a board meeting. It's the masculine problem that is most acute in the community that I grew up in is not enough dads and not enough homes. And that's a way bigger problem, I'm sorry to say, than a Goldman executive not being properly respected in the workplace. It just is. But again, this is something that our elites are very uncomfortable with because I don't know why it is. I think maybe it's an anti-religious thing. I don't know where it's coming from. But they hate the idea that men and women can actually be different and have different psychological needs.
Well, I always describe it as they're the people that are running the Titanic, and they don't want to change the class status of anybody on the Titanic, and the Titanic's still going to sink with the way they're doing the ship, but they just want to make sure that the top, that first class, has an equal number from each racial group, gender identity, sexual preference, whatever, the alternative religious thing, whatever the newest identity wave is, but they're not changing the power on the ship, and they're not changing the steerage of the ship. And as long as that's the case, we're all going to sink in the end. But it's not really, these revolutionaries are pseudo-revolutionaries. that they're not real in that sense, aside from the way that they cause meaningful cultural damage that flows down to working class communities in small towns.
That's right. That's right.
And that's the end of the clip. I hope you guys enjoyed it as much as I did. And again, his book is called Hillbilly Elegy, and you can pretty much get it anywhere. I got a copy from the local grocery store. All right, white people, that's the damage for now. Thank you so much for listening. I look forward to your thoughts below.